This lecture will likely be the final lecture in our series on connecting to the network, the internet, and capturing data and integrating data into our Android application. This lecture is going to focus on JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. This lecture is, as I mentioned, probably the last of a series of about 6 or 7 lectures. If you're just joining this lecture, there are about six lectures that precede it in a playlist. So take a look on YouTube for the playlist that this lecture belongs to, and you'll see the preceding lecture. So, JSON. What is JSON? JSON data is a lightweight, and I stress, language-independent format of data. Okay? So what that means is that we can capture data from one program and integrate it into another program. We can look for these JSON sources of data and integrate them together. And that's a lot of where we're going to add value in our mobile apps, is in the integration of data. And what I mean is we take data, we put it together, and we make conclusions based on that data. You're seeing this a lot now in well-written mobile apps. One of the apps that I like a lot, that I use somewhat frequently, is the Fly Delta app. And I was on my way to London one time and had a very tight connection in Boston. And my flight to Boston was running late. I knew I wasn't going to make the connection. I went onto the app, and it was able to determine where I was. And it also knew that there was a flight to Detroit, also leaving Cincinnati, that was also leaving late, and that I could still get on that flight, make a connection in Detroit, and still get to London on time, which really impressed me, given that I didn't have much slack in my schedule. It was able to make all that decision based on the information that it had at hand. My account number, my ticket number, where I wanted to go, and then the flight status of flights leaving Cincinnati and which ones would get me to London eventually. So that's kind of what we're looking for, is we're looking for ways that we can aggregate data many times from different sources, and we can add value by aggregating data. JSON is one of the easy ways that we can aggregate data from different sources. And it's so easy because a lot of it's already built into the Android platform. So it's fairly simple to take some raw JSON data like we have here, which is plantplaces.com/perl/mobile/view plantsjson.pl, combined name equals redbud. And this gives us a bit of JSON data. You see, fairly lightweight. We have essentially a lot of name value pairs. So this gives us that JSON data. And then using some things that are built into the Android API, we can parse this data, and we can turn it from just string data, or from text data, in other words, into a collection of plant objects. And that's what we're going to look at today. So we have to look at this, and we can maybe gather a few things about the syntax. The syntax is very important. We're going to start and end the entire JSON block with a curly. Okay, within the set of curlies, we're going to have a set of name value pairs. So we have a name like plants, and then a colon, and the colon separates the name from the value. Now, if we have a colon and that's followed by an open square bracket, that means this is an array. What's an array? An array is a collection of data, or in other words, a list of data. And where you see this open square bracket, you'll see a closed square bracket down below. And what that means is this entire collection or list of data is assigned to the name plants. Within that, we're going to have a collection of, again, data, and that data will be surrounded with curlies and terminated with a semicolon. Okay, so that's one line. Second line, surrounded with curlies, terminate with a semicolon. Third line, surround with curlies, terminate with a semicolon. And you'll find that each of these lines has that same syntax. Within the curlies, we're going to have a set of name value pairs separated by a colon. A set of name value pairs separated by a colon. Okay, this is a simple name value combination. This format is fairly straightforward for a computer program to make. This is what we're looking at here is a little service that I made on Plant Places. Honestly, really didn't take me that long to make. This is publicly available if for whatever reason you want to do any kind of plant search in your own app. This is publicly available, and I will, as I always do, post the code from this lecture on GitHub. If you want to see how it works under the covers. But this is what we're looking at, some kind of JSON form data. So let's go back and see what we have. We said a data interchange format, easy to parse, easy to generate, easy to read and write, and that's key. We need something that's easy for a program to read and write. This little Perl script really didn't take me that long to write. I have to have a database behind it. Okay, we're querying a live database, so that's a little bit tricky if you're new to programming. But beyond that, writing the actual Perl interface was a very straightforward thing to do, and fairly quick too. If I change this from Redbud maybe to Maple, you'll see that it generally, and of course now it's a little bit slow, but it generally will produce the results fairly quickly, which is important as well. Okay, no images, it's just straight data, straight text. Okay, so what do we have? Name, value, pairs, and curlies. Okay. Square brackets indicate some kind of ordered list of values. So here's another example, similar to the one that we just looked at. This is a name called employees. We see there's a colon, which separates the name from the value. The value is a square bracketed list, which means it's an array. In this case, our array has only one item. Okay, our array has only one item. And notice there's no comma that follows this curly that closes that item, because the last item in a list, let's see if I can squeeze this together a little bit, the last item in a list typically won't have a comma. A comma separates everything before the last item in a list. As you see here, there's a comma, but right here, no comma. Okay, so we have an array of employees with one item, last name Jones, in quotes, first name Brandon, in quotes. Again, name value pairs, the name and the value separated by a colon, and then the pairs themselves separated by a comma. Okay, now how do we parse this? What we need to do is we need to call the, well, you tell me, based on our prior videos, what do we have in this bullet point? Okay, we see an equal sign, which is important, and that means an assignment operator, which means we can take this line and split it into two halves. We see a variable type called JSON object. We see a variable name called JSON object with a lowercase j. So this is a variable declaration. Variables are places in memory. Okay, JSON object is the variable type. JSON object with a lowercase j is the variable name. So on the left, we have variable declaration. On the right, we're calling a constructor, new JSON object, and we're passing in string data to this constructor. That is our object type. Remember, a variable type and object type, remember what those concepts mean with polymorphism. Variable type tells you what methods you're allowed to call. Object type tells you what will happen when you call those methods. That's polymorphism. Okay, in this case, the variable type and the object type happen to be the same, and we know that the keyword new means we're calling a constructor. So create a new JSON object, pass it in whatever data we choose. It will return this JSON object and store it into this variable. So what is this string called data here? It's a string called data. It's this entire blob of data we have here. It's the whole honkin' thing. It's everything. We want to take this entire string, and we want to pass it into our JSON object constructor. Not so bad, because if you remember, let me see if I can pull this up. If you remember what we were doing in our last video, okay, one second, let me pull this up. If you remember what we were doing in our last video, allow me to Control M and we can see this in high def. We were passing in a request URI, and that URI is very similar to the one we're seeing in this browser window here. We're passing that off to our network DAO, and then what we're getting in return is all of the data in one string. Okay, so the next step, the next thing we want to do is going to be fairly straightforward. We want to do exactly what we have on this presentation, declare a new JSON object, declare a new JSON object on the right, assign it to the variable on the left. So what we're going to do is, whoops, sorry, refocus there. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to say JSON object, be careful of capitalization, JSON object equals new JSON object. And then we're just going to say raw plant data. Okay, it's redlining, and we know the first thing we want to do is fix our red line with the Control-Shift-O, which is going to organize imports. Okay, getting another red line here. I'm going to Control-1, add catch clause. Again, we don't know exceptions yet. We will talk about exceptions in a future video. Let's, we'll talk about exceptions in a future video. In the meantime, we'll just leave it like so and save. Okay, sorry, let me disconnect from the Android virtual device. I'll say pass the data into a JSON object. Okay, so we now have the data in an in-memory representation. What comes next? The next thing to come is this thing called a JSON array, because remember, when we look at our data, we're going to see all the data are held in an array associated with the name called plants. So what we need to do next is get the data out. So we're going to say JSON array all plants equals object JSON object dot get JSON array. So this is the key word here. Get JSON array means find the array associated with the name called plants. Find the array associated with the name called plants and push it into this variable called all plants. The variable called all plants is a variable of type JSON array. Variable of type JSON array. Okay, so we go back to Eclipse then, and we're going to say get the data associated with the array named plants. Okay, so we're going to say JSON object, or we could call that root object. You know, it might be better to call that something like root object. We'll go ahead and call it JSON object. And then we're going to say get array. I'm sorry, get JSON array. Okay, notice that we have to pass in a name. We have to pass in a name, okay? Because it knows that our arrays, just like variables, have to have a name. And we say plants. Okay, a little bit of Control-1 magic here to assign this to a new local variable. And again, Eclipse is smart enough to figure out what we need. So we're going to say plants array, enter, and save. Okay, so what do we want to do next? Well, we want to iterate over this plants array. I called it all plants here. Let's go ahead and stay, well, now we'll keep it as, and what do we want to call that plants array? That's fine. That's fine. We'll call it plants array for here because we already have something called all plants, so that'll work. Now, we have to understand a little bit about looping and iteration. Looping and iteration. Okay, this is what we call a for loop in Java. And a for loop is meant to walk over an array or a collection of some type and visit everybody in that array one time. So it's going to knock on the door of every item in that array. Okay, so we have our array. We have our first item. In this case, we have a Chinese lantern. We have our next item. Okay, Acer brungianum. Acer campestri is our third. We're going to visit these one at a time, starting with the first. And so how do we do that? Well, look at the syntax. I know it's a little bit goofy, but we start with a for loop. Within a for loop, we have parentheses, which I'll explain in just a minute. Then we have an open curly and a closed curly. Everything between the open curly and closed curly, in our case here, will be run exactly once for each item in this array. Okay, everything between the open curly and closed curly will be run exactly once for everything in this array. Okay, so what's in between the parentheses then? We have the declaration, where we're declaring a variable. Just look at this. Just focus on this. Ignore everything else around it. So for int I equals 0, let me see if I can get that without the paren. Focus on that, and what do we have? We have a variable declaration like we've seen many times before. Variable type is int. Variable name is I. An assignment, we're assigning it to the number 0, and this is a primitive. So we can assign it just to the number 0. We don't have to assign an object to it. So declare a variable. This is our counter. Okay, this is our hands before we've started counting. In Java and in most object-oriented languages, we tend to start counting with the number 0. So this is our counter. Next, we're going to say, I want to go over every single object that's in this all plants array. I want to go through every single object that's in this all plants array. And every time I touch one of these objects and I finish with the closed curly, I want to add 1 to this integer called I. Again, if you're kind of new to programming, you might not know what that I++ means. What that means is take I and simply add 1 to it. It's very frequent that we need to add 1, increase a number by the value of 1. And so that I++ is a little bit of shorthand. So make a counter variable. Okay. Continue to execute until the counter variable is until the counter variable is greater than or equal to the number of plants. And then every time we iterate, every time we loop, add 1 to the counter variable. Don't make that a less than or equal to, by the way. You want that to be a less than. Remember, we start counting with 0. So if we have 3 items in the all plants array, this is going to execute for 0, 1, and 2. 0, 1, and 2. If you count 0, 1, and 2 on your fingers, you know that's 3 unique items. If you made this less than or equal to, and there were only 3 items in here, this would iterate for 0, 1, 2, and 3. And again, count that on your fingers. You notice that's actually 4 items you're looking at. The problem is, if you do that, you're going to get an exception called an array index out of bounds, which you should not get. You should prevent that from happening. So be careful. It's a common new developer mistake to make that less than or equal to, because that's kind of what we're thinking of. But no. You want that to be less than, because this is going to tell you how many items are in the array. But you have to remember we start counting at 0. Okay? Once we do that, what we're going to do is we are going to create a new plant object that we're going to populate from our JSON object. And then we're going to get our JSON object. And then we can pull out values one at a time from that JSON object. Now take a look at this method. All plants, and again, forgive me, my syntax is a little bit goofy. It's the JSON array. We called ours plant array. .get JSON object I. What does that mean? Get JSON object is going to return the entire item that I have highlighted here. Okay, and these are the items in our list. So there are going to be 1. In this case, there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4, there's 5. 6. So these are ordered by numbers, and that's why we have to pass in this magic I. That's why we have to pass in that I, because what we're saying is I want to get the array element at that I value, where I starts at 1, then goes to 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then so forth. We want to get the object in the list at this position in the list, the position represented by that variable I. Okay? After that, then, we can start getting data from the plant object by using getString or getInt or whatever we wish to get. So at this point, it's just a matter of plugging what we've learned in. It's not too bad. So let's go ahead and set up our loop. Again, I'll heavily comment this. And in a normal program, you would see comments, probably not to the degree that you see here. Because we want to know what every line does, I'm pretty rigorous about commenting every line. So I'm going to say iterate over the collection of plants from JSON. Okay, and we know we can do that with the for loop. Okay, as luck would have it, Eclipse has some shortcuts that will help us, especially if we don't really understand this for syntax. And what you can do is type in for and then hold Control and hit space. And we have some options here: iterate over an array, iterate over an array with a temporary variable. Let me see if I can click these without committing to them yet. That's pretty cool. Okay, iterate over a collection. For each, we'll go ahead and we'll choose the first one. It's not exactly what we want, but it's close enough. It's going to save us some time with some syntax. Okay, what it doesn't know is what is this array.length. we need to make just a little change here and say plants array. And then I believe we're actually calling a method name length. So open and close curly. And there we go. And voila, that sets up our for loop. Don't get too distracted with the syntax of a for loop. Don't worry too much about it. Just know that the goal here is to visit each member of this array exactly one time, starting at the bottom, or starting at the first element, which we call element 0, going all the way to the last element. Okay, we also know that every time we touch an element, this number I is going to increase by 1. So now we're going to say get the current plant object. Okay, plants array. Okay, dot get JSON object, and again, that's going to take an index. That's going to take a number, an ordinal number, which we're saying is the variable I. Control 1, assign to new local variable. JSON object, we're going to call this JSON plant. I don't like how I capitalize that. JSON plant equals plants array dot get JSON object I. Okay, let me, as a matter of fact, be more specific. Get the current plant JSON object. I'm also going to say create a plant object that will, let's say plant DTO object. That's kind of redundant. Create a plant DTO object that will hold the value from JSON. What we're doing here is we are translating data from JSON to Java. Okay, so we're moving data from JSON to Java. The JSON is this stuff here. The Java is plant equals new plant. This is the Java part right here. Okay, and save. Okay, now we have to do just a little bit of honest moving data, a little bit of grunt work. We want to move the ID, genus, species, cultivar, and common name from JSON to our plant object. And when we're all done, we want to add our plant object to the, look at this. And that's the same as down here. To the collection of plants named all plants. I'm going to go ahead and do this part now because I always forget to. Allplants.add and then plant. Yeah, you'd be amazed the number of times I've taught something similar to this, gone through, done a lot of work, compile, build, run, do a demo, and then I forgot to do the most simple part, which is add the Java object, the DTO, in other words, to a collection. Okay, just a few more lines to go. We just need to move the data from one to the other. Let's say JSON plant dot get int, and what's our ID? Remember what our ID is? Here's our ID. This is our global unique identifier. Okay, get int, and we need to pass it a name. Remember, we have name value pair. Name is ID. Value is what follows. Name is ID. Value is what follows. Name is ID. Value is what follows. So for the name, we're going to say ID. Terminate with a semicolon. Do our control 1 trick. Assign to new local variable. We'll call this simply GUID. Okay, and then we're going to say, we'll say get the ID from JSON. Save into Java. Okay, then we're going to say plant dot set GUID. Remember this guy, set GUID? And Eclipse figures out the variable we want to pass in is, guess what, GUID. Okay, now honestly, this is going to start going pretty fast. So I'm just going to copy this comment and change the variable. So get the genus from JSON, save into Java. Okay, JSON plant, get string. And again, what is our genus? It's this right here, the thing called genus. Next we'll do species, then cultivar, then common. We're going to do them in that order. JSON plant get string genus. Okay. Control 1, assign to new local variable, string genus, equals JSON plant get genus, plant dot set genus, genus. Okay, we can actually combine these lines if we want. I can say JSON plant. Okay, let's see, we'll paste. Get the species. Okay, I can say, whoops, sorry. I can say JSON plant, whoops, get species. Oh, sorry, what am I doing? Get string. Okay. Okay, and we'll say species. What I can do is I can wrap these together if I want and say plant.set species, JSON plant, get string species. That's a short way to do it. The only trick is it's a little harder to debug if we do it this way. But this is just the same as the lines above. It just does it all in one line. Finally, get the cultivar from JSON, save into Java. Okay, we'll do it the old-fashioned way here. We'll say JSON plant dot get string. Okay, and we're going to say cultivar. Okay, a little bit of control 1 action. Assign to new local variable cultivar. Okay, plant dot set cultivar and cultivar. And believe it or not, I'm going to save that. And at this point, we're all set. So we still want to know a little bit about those exceptions, which we will explore in a later lecture. But let's look at what we've changed here. We have our collection of plant objects. We have our request URI that's dynamically going to be populated with, there we go. It's just off a little bit. Whatever search term the user passed in. We're going to create a network DAO, which is our low-level networking. Send in the request URI, the query URI above. Okay. Get that data and make it a JSON object. Iterate over an array. Okay. And now we're going to create array. Now we're going to iterate over the array. And by iterate, we're going to visit each member of the array one at a time. All the stuff in these curly braces will run once for each line in our array. All of the stuff in the curly braces will run once for each line in our array. Create a brand new plant object, and trust me on this one, you want to do that inside the loop. Okay? Get our JSON object, get the ID from our JSON object, get the genus, get the species, get the cultivar from our JSON object. Take each of those, set those into our plant object, and then finally add our plant object to the collection. And then finally, return that collection. So I'm going to save. I'm going to Control M. I'm going to, do we already have a breakpoint here? Let me see. Yeah, we do. We have a breakpoint. I set one more breakpoint right before the loop just in case I get a little trigger happy. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say debug as Android application. We'll give this just a moment to load onto the emulator, which I already have running, and then we'll take a look in the debugger. And the emulator's going, so I'm going to choose select a plant from the GPS screen. And what the heck? Let's go ahead and search on maple. Haven't done maple yet. And I'm going to hit search. When I hit search, we're going to have our breakpoint catch. Search. Okay, breakpoint's catching. That's good. Okay, let's follow this very closely. I'm going to Control M so we can look at this on the big screen. So we're currently in our separate thread, and sure enough, you see our UI is still responsive. It's come back. It's waiting for our results to come in, so our UI remains responsive. Okay, I'm going to bring the debugger so we can see what I'm doing here. Step over. We're going to find out the search term. I'm going to mouse over, and we should see it's maple. And it is maple. Okay, step over. We're going to create our online plant DAO. We've taken out that stub we had before. And now we're going to step into because we want to watch the fetch plants method run. So step into. Okay, first of all, we create an empty collection which is going to hold our plant objects. Next, we define our URI. Let me mouse over that. And you see this URI here. Oops, I just lost it. You see this URI here? I'm going to copy. We know that looks very similar to the URI that we've been looking at all along. Okay, and we know it's well formed because I can put this in a browser and I see a bunch of maple plants, a bunch of maple trees. Um, by the way, if you do have any problems with JSON, I strongly encourage you to do exactly what I'm doing here and run in the debugger, look at your URI, put that in the browser, make sure you're actually getting JSON data back. Do these steps. Honestly, as you hopefully have figured out, if you have used the debugger in this class, the debugger is going to save you a whole lot of time. Okay, now what we're going to do is we are going to F6 and we are going to make the request for this URI, which will probably take a few moments. I choose F6. We've already looked through that low-level networking in a previous lecture, so I'm not going to worry too much about what that low-level networking is doing. Well, it looks like it already came back. Wow, okay, that was a little faster than I thought. In any case, when I mouse over raw plant data, okay, if I expand this, take a look. Again, we're in the debugger. We're in the debugger right now. We're looking at data that has come back. A lot of raw data, isn't it beautiful? Quite a few plants there, quite a few plants. Every plant has an ID, genus, species, cultivar, and common name. They all have them defined. Some of them might have an empty, which is okay. We have cultivar here, which is empty. We have a cultivar here, which is Morton State Street. So they can be empty, but all plants will definitely have each of these four attributes: ID, genus, species, cultivar, and common. If they don't, then there's probably a problem in the program that's creating the data that we have here. Okay, so JSON object raw plant data, we choose F6. Okay, it looks like it parsed that okay. Let's get the plants array. Now let's iterate over the plants array one at a time. Okay, looks like my debug line went down here. Create a plant object. Get a matching plant object from the JSON array. Get the ID. The ID for this first one is 701. Let's take, whoops, sorry, scrolled up on the wrong screen. Let's take a look. What is our very first maple? It's 701, flowering maple Chinese lantern. Okay, so I choose F6. What's our genus? It should be Acer, which is the genus for maples. Oh, a butylon. Okay, it's a okay. It's not a true maple, but it's not the same genus as a true maple, but it is the common name is maple, and that counts. You see, we can as long as we have maple somewhere in the common name, that's fine. Okay, so set species, set cultivar. Okay, and the cultivar is what? It came up off screen there. Oh, you know, I forgot to do common. Oops. Okay. Well, yeah. I'll put common in there before. Yeah, I just realized I forgot common. I'll put common in there before I commit this to GitHub, but because that's only one change, that'll be a pretty easy thing to do. So it's going to iterate over here once for every single plant that's in our collection. I can go ahead and press resume. What we should see, if all works well, we're going to go to the onPostExecute method, which means the thread is finished. Hit play. And with any luck then, we should see some data appear. And sure enough, there we go. Take a look. Here's the data. Here's the data that we've gotten back from the web. Okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. I do want to show you that with common name. I'm going to pause. Well, no, okay. I'll tell you what. I'll go ahead and put the common name in now. It's going to pause the lecture, but this will be a very quick fix. So Alt left arrow takes us back in Eclipse history. Okay, all I need to do here is say JSON plant.get string. Okay, and I think we're going to call it common. We just verify that that's what we actually see on our JSON. Yes, common. Okay. Control 1, assign a new local variable. Okay, and I'm going to call it common. Okay, then I'm going to say plant dot set common. Okay, okay, and boom, and boom. Get the common name from JSON, save into Java. Control S, disconnect. I wish that would hot swap. Control M. Java view, and we will go ahead. I'm going to run this one. We've already seen it through the debugger. I'm going to run. Hopefully it will go ahead and go on the, yep, there we go. Okay, and I'm going to choose OK. And I'm going to go ahead and pause so that I can watch this load. I'll let this load on the, well, see, every time I say that, it loads pretty quickly. So we're just going to run through this in play mode. I just want to show you that it will definitely work, and it will definitely give us a user-friendly common name when it does work. Okay, well, we'll try. It's all right. Oh, there we go. See, once again, every time I think I'm about to pause it, it comes right back. Okay, we choose select a plant. We'll search on a different plant this time. We've searched on redbud. I'll tell you one that is about to start coming into bloom is the magnolia. And this one, there are quite a few plants associated with magnolia. I'm going to hit search, and again, I'm running without debugger turned on. What we should see now is a live feed. You see here the threads going out and getting our magnolia data, and boom, there it is, the magnolia data. Because the emulator is a little bit slower than real life, you can actually watch as it goes to fetch that network data. In real life on a real app, you get a little bit better response than that. But you see, you can scroll through this all you want. Several magnolias. So what we've covered in this lecture is how to parse a fairly straightforward JSON array. We start with a JSON object, pass some data into that. We pull out of that an array. From that array, we can pull out individual elements. From those individual elements, we can pull out individual values, assign them to local variables in a Java-friendly data type, and assign those variables or assign those variables to our DTO object. So that's what we looked at today. Thanks for joining in. Next thing we'll look at will likely be exceptions, because we don't want to ignore them. They are important, and they are important for building user-friendly Android apps. So that's what we'll look at next in our next lecture. Thanks for joining me through this networking series. And again, I will commit everything I have to GitHub and make the link available on this video. Thank you.